was challenged to do a different kind of video today. You know, a lot of people don't believe in the wealth transfer. They think only crazy people do it. And I want to tell you the story of how come I began to believe in the wealth transfer. But I will tell you that when I first heard it, I decided I was going to prove it couldn't be true. Because I didn't know that the God of the Bible would have a desire to see his people so blessed. I think the wealth transfer is a rational perspective. And, you know, there's really three perspectives that I think we need to consider. Some people don't believe that God would ever use the prophetic, but I guess they don't believe in the Bible. I mean, we know that the prophetic is a biblical example. I mean, there was the example in Acts of Agabus warned of a coming famine. We saw Jesus essentially prophesy to Peter, go catch a fish, pull out the silver coin, and pay the temple tax. The prophets in mass are predicting that there's going to be a wealth transfer. But, you know, just because a prophet says something doesn't mean that you or I need to do what they say. I mean, it needs to be tested and, you know, filtered, discerned. But there's the prophetic angle. There's the personal angle. What kind of experience do you have? I mean, are they talking about things that you know about or things that you don't know about? Because your personal experience is an important part of discerning what you should do. And then there's the professional angle. I mean, what are experts in the field saying? And when prophets start talking about money, you can see if what they're saying lines up. Now, it may be irrational at times, and other times it's just right down the middle, and absolute professional people are saying it. And so, is there a history of a wealth transfer? Well, there clearly is. I mean, in the book of Exodus, in fact, it goes back that the wealth transfer was prophesied. I believe it's in Genesis 15. He was talking to Abram before he was Abraham, and he said, your descendants are going to go into a land, and for 400 years they're going to be in slavery, and I'm going to bring them out, and they're going to come out with great wealth, and they're, you know, going to head to a promised land. When I heard that the wealth transfer was prophesied, I was actually going to seminary, and I went to Bible school, I went to seminary, I've been a pastor, so I have a good understanding of the Bible, and I know that I'm, you know, orthodox, but we both agree that people can have a wide variety of beliefs that are outside of those specific doctrines related to salvation. It's only the grace of God that we're saved. We're saved by faith through grace. It's the gift of God, not by works, lest any man should boast. So if you disagree on that, or the virgin birth, or the, you know, the authority of Scripture, those are all things that, you know, you get out of orthodoxy and into error. But I believe those things, but I didn't believe in the wealth transfer. But then I realized the power of the wealth transfer if it was true. And so I wanted to know if it was true. And so I began to study it. And, you know, if you get a doctrine or a theology, or you hear something different, you have every right, and really, I think even a godly expectation that you should study to show yourself approved. You know, Paul urged Timothy to study the Scriptures, and Paul also urged Timothy to use the prophetic words that you've received to basically urge or to carry out what God has called you to do. He even said to war with those words. And so, you know, that's a little different than what some people believe. You may not believe that verse in the Bible. I believe it. But, you know, I want to challenge what you might believe, because I'm challenged. I've become challenged in what I believe. And many times I've thought new things, and sometimes I don't assume those new thoughts, and sometimes I do. And as I approach 62, I would admit that there's less things I'm sure of, but with exact, there's doctrines and things that I thought I believed that I'm not sure about. But I think that means I believe more in God than ever. I've had more time with God. I don't doubt him. And I'm more confident of his promises. And I think I'm becoming more and more a man of faith. I hope you are as well. You know, if you don't learn more as you grow, I think there's something the matter with you. And if you think you know more and more the older you get, I don't think you have much humility. So I'm willing to admit that I'm realizing, although I'm actually knowing more, I realize that my capacity to know things is so much greater. And even though my knowledge base is growing, I'm becoming more humble because I know I don't know everything. And so let me share with you why I think the wealth transfer is actually a valid perspective. Because I was a pastor for 8 years, and then my wife and I felt led to, well, we went as missionaries, and we had a very frustrating experience as missionaries. We actually had some experience, some success in real estate. We didn't flip the houses, we fixed up a bunch of houses. I had dabbled in real estate before I got married, and which is exactly half my life ago I got married, and I was approaching 31, and what we found out on the mission field is it's really hard to be missionaries when you don't have enough money. I mean, you're fighting culture shock and everything else. We went to Hungary, which is the second most difficult language for a U.S. citizen to learn. Chinese is probably the hardest, but then Mandarin Chinese, but Hungarian and Finnish are very related, but they're both extremely difficult languages. We were never able to have any mastery of the language. We learned dozens or 100 words, but we struggled because of that. We came back. I felt led to go into business, and that's when this really started changing. I don't know if it's ever happened to you, but I became convinced that if I had ever heard God, I knew that he told me that there was a time of blessing that was going to come into my life. And I actually wrote it down. I knew that he was speaking to me. I could hear God was talking to me through an experience I had. And I knew that he had a desire to bless me. And he kind of just left me like that. I mean, that was 25 years ago that I had that experience. And it was probably 22 years with just very random confirmations that, yeah, that would happen someday. But I really didn't have knowledge of how or why. But as I've talked to people and I've had candid conversations, I found there's a lot of people who have heard from God, that he has confirmed to them that they have a time of blessing and tremendous outpouring. This could be a spiritual outpouring, but I'm not talking just a spiritual outpouring. I believe that's coming as well. But I'm talking about a manifestation of wealth. And as a business person, stewardship is an important thing. That's actually even in the name of this channel. It's one of the biggest priorities of my life. I want to be a biblical person that honors God. I want to steward well what he's given me. And I really want to encourage others to steward well what they've been given. But when you realize that God is on your side, that he is going to bless you in the future, it changes a lot of things, and you begin to live differently because you sense that the divine is on your side and that you can come on his side and that you can run together. I mean, he's the leader, but he's asking us to serve him and serve with him and co-labor with him. And I think that's, really an important thing. And so when I heard of this idea of the wealth transfer, it was about 3.5 years ago, and I didn't believe it at all. And so I really thought, it would be so wonderful if that was true, but I just don't believe it. And so I wanted to, kind of prove it wrong. And so I read a book by actually a professor who, this is a serious guy. And I went to Wagner University, so a well-known professor from Pasadena, California. He's lived in Colorado and different places, but Dr. Peter Wagner wrote a book called The Great Transfer of Wealth. And a number of prophetic words, and then, there's scripture that supports the concept in general, but there's many people who have prophesied about an end-time revival, and many of those same people who prophesied about an end-time revival talk about an end-time outpouring of financial blessing. And one of the, probably the best, for lack of a better word, prophets that I feel like of my generation, he would have been a little bit older than me. He died actually in 2016, I believe, Kim Clement. And he's unique because he was extremely well known, extremely accurate, and he did so much video, and so many of his events were recorded, and his family has preserved those digitally. And so he's the only prophetic voice that I know of that you can digitally search exactly what he said. And then, there's a lot of videos on YouTube and stuff like that. But it's really nice. And so I've based all my study on what digitally he said. And I honestly find him easier to read than I do to watch, because he's very musical and he spends a lot of time on music, and so it's not quick to watch his videos. I enjoy them at times, but there's a lot of music that's different style than I prefer, and so I prefer to read Kim Clement. And I've spent hundreds of hours, and I was shocked that he prophesied a great transfer of wealth, just like my college professor was talking about. But my college professor didn't reference Kim Clement, but I viewed Kim Clement as extremely integrous and an extremely good source of a prophetic word. And I began to be shocked at the pinpoint accuracy and the just the details that Kim Clement would prophesy. And he talked about 8 wells of blessing that are coming to the church at a future point. Just like in the days of old, there's wealth, there's affluence that is coming to godly people so that they can have more influence. And that, when I began to realize there's a reason for the wealth increase, that really got my attention. And that started, I guess I would say, because of what my college professor wrote, Peter Wagner, I began to be curious. I started looking on YouTube. I watched other places. But then when I began studying Kim Clement, he was extremely specific about how the money would come through these 8 different ways. But then honestly, if you read him in detail, there's numerous other ways. And I ended up writing 2 books about it. One I just finished with Lauren Atkinson about 7 months ago, and it's called The Rise of Kingdom Billionaires. This morning, I was reading about what's going to be the fulfillment of one of the financial prophecies that Kim Clement prophesied about. Against all odds, he was prophesying that the best day for Ford Motor Company has not happened yet. That Ford was going to rise essentially from the ashes, and you'd have to see the exact words because I haven't read this prophecy for months. But he prophesies that Ford is going to have a great future. And it's going to rise to the highest level, I think, and it's going to rise, I think he said, to $28 a share. Well, it hasn't been that high since he said that. Ford has really struggled. But today in the headlines, I was looking on Zero Hedge, and Ford is one of the sole companies that's not going to be negatively impacted to a very big degree at all with these new tariffs that Trump is doing. Kim Clement saw, God revealed to him prophetically that Ford stock was going to be a great return on investment at a future point. Am I buying Ford stock today? No, I'm not, because I'm waiting for what I know professionally. As an investor, I realize that car companies are going to really struggle. But my eyes are on Ford thanks to the prophetic insight that Kim Clement gave. And he gave 8 other specific insights that haven't happened yet. They've started to happen, but that's what I want to talk about, because if you possibly could believe in the wealth transfer, you should pay attention. Now, I don't believe every Christian is going to participate in the wealth transfer. And I think a lot of people are going to be kind of essentially left behind. And it's kind of funny, I've got a number of Jerry Jenkins books, and at the time I read them, I thought they were pretty good, and he's definitely a very good writer, but I've come to disagree with his theology, and that kind of might make you mad, because you might have an idea, because, you know, it's funny, a lot of people in the prophetic movement have talked about, hey, Jesus is coming, brother. Jesus is coming, sister. Well, I'm 62. I do believe Jesus is coming. But I believe that since 1979, when I began to hear that teaching and that prophecy, and I didn't end up going to college because of that. And it really gave me an apathetic view of involvement and engagement. And I grew up in an era when Christians didn't participate in society because of our theology. And we just thought you just pray about it and don't worry about it, and Jesus has got everything. And I just endured, I don't know about how you view the last 5 years, but it's been hell. You know, since 2020, I mean, it was a mess for the last 20 years, but then it all went crazy. And the way I look at it is the conservatives, the constitutional people, the biblical people. And, you know, I love people who love America, whether they happen to be Christians or not. But they generally tend to be conservatives, and many of them want to be biblical, because if you, in my opinion, have an accurate view of American history, you can see that our founding fathers were highly motivated by the Bible. I mean, they had different theologies than we do. Thomas Jefferson has ripped a number of scriptures right out of the Bible, the Jefferson Bible. I would kind of like to have one just to say that I had one, but I would never reference it because he took out all the questionable verses. But he was a godly man. Benjamin Franklin, I think, had a very different theology than I did, but I do believe he feared God. And, you know, different people were unique people. I think Donald Trump is being used of God, but he's got a very different perspective than I do on the Bible, and probably that you do as well. But I believe that God is using Donald Trump, and I believe he's not done with America. And what I believe that God is doing is he's going to bring a wealth transfer, and he's looking for people of faith who would believe. And I think if you want to believe in the wealth transfer, you need to invest in the wealth transfer. But I do think people are going to miss the wealth transfer, but you won't miss the whole thing. And I'm going to tell you what the first 4 wells of blessing that Kim Clement prophesied. You might become amazed at what detail Kim Clement prophesied. And then I'm going to tell you that he prophesied 8 wells, and we don't know with any clarity what the other 4 wells are. And you might be going, oh, well, it's all hogwash. And well, why don't you watch and see? You might be shocked that I think the second one that's going to happen is Kim Clement prophesied about XRP. And there's different people read these prophecies of Kim Clement differently. I don't know if you know it, but Bitcoin existed a long time before the exchanges were able to be engineered. And so it was kind of a tech historical landmark the day that some guy filled with regret. And I've even seen an interview of him. This guy paid 10,000 Bitcoin for 2 large pizzas. But that was the first exchange of cryptocurrency. And within a year of that event, Kim Clement was speaking, and he said, hey, I see something that Christians are going to be able to invest in that starts with an X and it ends with a P, and this is going to bring great wealth to the church and those who choose to invest. And what's interesting about Kim Clement that really gave me a different perspective of many people who might believe of the wealth transfer, Kim Clement is very clear time and time again that you need to invest, that you need to participate. And I think that confirms Hebrews 11:6. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. There's going to be people who believe in the wealth transfer, but they won't be able to participate in the wealth transfer because they don't engage. And then there's some people who have a lot of resources and some people who have a little. And I think this is a time when Kim Clement consistently says there's people who are going to come into millions of dollars and they only invest a couple thousand. And the insinuation is even those with hundreds can turn into millions of dollars during the time of the wealth transfer as God leads and guides them. And God kind of is saying a rebuke to the church, and he's frustrated with Kim, and he goes, Kim, I want to talk to my church about billionaires, but 99% of my church can't even conceive of that, so I guess I'll talk about millionaires. And so it's really interesting when you study all the financial implications of the Kim Clement prophecies that are recorded at houseofdestiny.com, or you can find them at kimclement.com as well. And you can go into the About section, and then you can do a database search of all the prophetic words, putting 1 or 2 or 3 words together. It's a pretty old database. It's not like it's been modernized, and it's not perfect, but it really helps you get back to the original writing of what Kim Clement said, and you know that it's hosted by his family, and those were his words. And it's literally hundreds and hundreds of pages of prophetic words that Kim gave over like 35 years of his ministry. And over those 30 years, he consistently saw a wealth transfer that was going to come, and he consistently talked about what they were going to be. I think one of the first ones is going to be XRP. The first one, I think, is really a crazy one, and if you're not close to as old as me, you probably don't remember much from 1999, but there's really a historical hint of what the second one is, and it's about the Iraqi dinar. And you may be going, well, I didn't know Kim Clement talked about that. And there's a lot of chatter on Patriot Channel about the Iraqi dinar. And I don't put much credibility in what the Patriot channels say about the Iraqi dinar, other than they do believe it's going to happen, and they do watch Iraq over the last year and a half has really moved towards revaluing their currency. And you might be going, that's the stupidest thing ever. This is the easiest one to say it's absolutely stupid to believe in the wealth transfer, because you're that crazy, you believe in the Iraqi dinar? Yeah. Do you know why? Because I know a little about history. I don't know everything about history, but I know that Saddam Hussein, I believe it was 1999, could have been 98, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, when Iraq invaded Kuwait. This was, so I actually had to go check my book, The Parable of the Dinar, and I saw that Saddam Hussein invaded in 1990. Kuwait was an invaded nation. Their currency fell apart because their government dissolved, because Saddam Hussein came in and took over their country. And so nobody wanted the money. And so the money just went down to nothing. And so people were trading it for 5 and 10 cents that was worth, $3. And, but one day, about 7.5 months after they were taken over, after a few weeks of stability, one day the banks opened back up, and the people who didn't believe that Kuwait dinar would ever revalue were handsomely rewarded when it went right back on par to where it was. And so there was millionaires by the scores that were made because they had faith for the future of that currency. And so I think they were kind of crazy to do that. You know, I didn't know that when a country was invaded, that if the country survived, the currency would revive. But interestingly, in 91, if you're my age, I remember where I was. I was getting on a train in 1991, heading to Spokane after completing seminary, and that was the day we started dropping bombs on Iraq, and we began to demolish their army, and it was viewed as one of the most powerful, I think the fourth most powerful army in the world. And they ended up, you know, killing Saddam Hussein, and they devalued his currency. And Kim Clement didn't prophesy for 20 years after that happened, is in 2011. So the United States in 1991 began to reclaim Iraq or deal with Iraq as an aggressive invader. And 20 years later, Kim Clement began to prophesy about the Iraqi dinar. I think that will be the first thing that will happen in the great transfer of wealth. And I think this is my own opinion. I think that the Iraqi dinar, because of what I saw Kim Clement say, is going to be a great benefit to the United States as we come into a very difficult time financially. And our president, Donald Trump, when he was interviewing Laura Ingraham, he talked about how many billions of dollars we have of dinar. And I believe that was like US dollars worth. Like you can buy 1 million dinar on eBay, and I've done it many times, for $1,000. That's pretty much what it costs on eBay. And I just use a US-based, highly rated company with eBay, and they've all been flawless transactions. Every eBay product I've bought always has come in. I don't use eBay a lot, but when I do, it works. And I've bought Iraqi dinar a number of times. Let me tell you, the next one he talked about is gold and silver. He talked about precious metals. Now, Kim Clement wasn't nearly specific about gold and silver because, you know, if you've been an investor for any time, I think those things have been manipulated down. And I'm totally convinced that silver is manipulated down. But Kim Clement totally talked about how God's hand was going to be on gold and silver. And I think practically, especially silver. And I think we're seeing the metal markets, really have stress right now. I mean, silver is one of the most amazing traded and I think manipulated commodities in the world. Normally on the COMEX, the amount of silver that the entire world manufactures is traded each week 2 to 3, even 5 times. Sometimes in one day they trade more silver quantity than will be mined in the entire world for the whole year. There's nothing else like that. Oil, they'll usually just do a day or two. And, other commodities, wheat, they might do a week or 2 weeks or maybe a month. I don't know. And so Kim Clement prophesied about silver and gold. And then interestingly, he talked about, from my memory, he said, I see an opportunity for the church to invest, for my people to invest. I see 3 letters. It's BBB. In America, people would think, well, that's Bed Bath & Beyond, and it's going down the dumper. And that's not what it was, because Bed Bath & Beyond isn't actually BBB. It's BBB plus something else. But in Canada, on one of their exchanges, you can buy a company. It's called Brixton Metals. It's up towards Alaska, well north of Vancouver, BC. But since I've bought in, because I studied this, I began to buy into it, and then billionaires have begun to also invest in Brixton Metals, and it's still so cheap. I mean, last time I looked, I've seen it as low as 5 cents a share. I've paid as much as 14 cents a share. Some people have paid $3 a share, but Kim Clement saw that Brixton Metals was going to go crazy. And to be honest, if silver rips, especially above $100, and I think it's going to go far higher than that. And some people would think, oh, Larry, you're just crazy. You can't say that silver, it's been, it's never gone that high. In fact, silver reached its highest when I was a senior in high school in 1981. And so you can't tell me that silver is a non-manipulated thing. When we think of silver and gold, everybody knows what's really worth a lot. What's precious metals? Well, silver and gold. And at that time, gold was about $300 an ounce or even less when I was in high school. And now it's over 10 times higher. Yet silver is still only 60% of what it was when I was in high school. You don't think that's manipulated down? So anyway, that's why I believe in the wealth transfer. I believe it's a biblical idea that God will bless his people. I believe it's a prophetic idea because I want to believe everything that the Bible says. Professionally, I study experts, and the things that Kim Clement talked about, you look up XRP on YouTube, and there's so many people that are so passionate and so bullish about XRP, yet he prophesied about that before Ripple Labs even announced it. He prophesied about that in 2012 is when I believe, maybe it was a year before Ripple Labs announced XRP is when Kim Clement prophesied about, I see an X, I see a P, and he prophesied about it 9 months after the guys bought the pizza with Bitcoin. Silver still hasn't gone up. He also, Kim Clement, talked about these are going to happen one at a time. There's going to be a year. Actually, the wealth transfer, according to Kim Clement, is going to last a number of years. It's going to be accompanied by a great outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And I think we're going to see the end time revival that even the Gospels in the Bible talk about. We haven't seen that yet. And I think that what God is doing is he's going to bless those who are faithful. He's looking to bring affluence to his people so they can have more influence. And with that influence, I think we're called to not allow ungodly people run and control our whole country. Our school systems are a mess. Our government fiscally are a mess. Our governments morally are a mess. I mean, there's people who literally believe that men should be able to dress as a girl and compete in girls' sports. I think that's horrible. And I think it's immoral. And I think that we're headed back the right direction. And I think we're about ready to see a wealth transfer because you have to have resources. The church has grown used to being poor. And I've experienced being extremely successful, but yet I was poor most of my life, and I've even gone bankrupt even after I started having great success. I lost my first company I started. That's not a rare story, and that's one of the things about being an American. I love Christianity, but I love my Judeo-Christian heritage as an American because we're people that take risk, and we get to win when we risk well, and sometimes we lose, and it hurts. But you jump back up and you fight again and you work hard. And I think that there are people who've got a destiny for wealth, and God is asking you, will you believe that you have a part in what I want you to be? I think God wants to bless you, but he wants you to invest. And so some people are going to leave their money in banks, and I believe that banks are going to fail. I've had dreams that banks are going to fail. I've had dreams that the equity markets, that lending, that the whole financial system is going to come down. And so you might go, well, Larry, you believe in the wealth transfer because what you've experienced as well as what the prophets say. I think that's a fair statement. as well as what I've studied and what I know about it. So that's why I believe in the wealth transfer, and I just would encourage you to do it. I know it's only crazy people who talk about it, but I thought, let's make a movie, a short video, a longer video, about what it would be like and why it's a rational decision. So thank you so much. I might come back again. Put questions in there. I'll try to respond. It could encourage future videos. And I just really appreciate you watching this today. Thank you so much. Make sure you don't miss your opportunities in the wealth transfer, and get everything done that God's called you to do. Thank you.